After all the training camp news and preseason snap data, here's the running back list that you need to use for your draft this year. I really wanted to move McCaffrey lower than 1. I just can't do it. I mean, I tweeted this out, but McCaffrey's a 28-year-old running back dealing with a calf strain coming off 400 touches. That is terrifying to take at pick 1. But on the flip side of that, Christian McCaffrey scored over 100 points more than the running back 2 in fantasy last year. So while I want to move McCaffrey down, the Niners are currently projected to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL this season. McCaffrey's coming off a season where he averaged 22.5 points. If you look at the Underdog pick'ems, they have McCaffrey for like 1,700 total yards this year. CMC still has to be 1. I'm going to go Breece over Bijan at 2. I've said this all offseason. Keep it very simple. Both running backs have a lot of things going for them. Both running backs have massive quarterback upgrades. In the case of Bijan Robinson, he actually, hopefully, has a coaching change upgrade where Arthur Smith is now in Pittsburgh. And in the case of Breece Hall, should be healthier where he's actually been able to go through, practice through the entire offseason, another year removed from the torn ACL. However, if you are looking at what we had from these RBs last season, we've already seen the elite fantasy season from Breece Hall before, where we just simply have never seen it from Bijan. So I'm going to have them the same tier. It would be different if Bijan was getting the massive quarterback upgrade and Breece wasn't, but you're going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers, so they both have it. Now, going down to our next tier, I could break this down to a couple different tiers, to be honest with you, but I just wanted to give you so many running backs on this list. We're going to throw them all in one. Jahmyr Gibbs is someone that I'm taking at the very top here every single time. The only way I would have Gibbs any lower than this is if you were playing in a non-PPR format and you thought Dave Montgomery was going to have the red zone role. But with Jahmyr Gibbs, a running back that averaged 3.5 receptions per game last year as a 21-year-old rookie. I mean, he went at the very top around 1 of the NFL draft. He actually had the red zone role in Detroit. He was splitting that with Montgomery at the end of last season. And I know people want to say, well, he's in a committee. Prime Alvin Kamara was in a committee. Prime Aaron Jones was in a committee. Prime Austin Eckler was in a committee. It doesn't freaking matter. If you're going to get every single target out of the backfield and you're going to get red zone involvement and you're running behind the best offensive line in the NFL, where right now sportsbooks have the Lions as the second highest scoring offense in the league this year, Gibbs is elite in fantasy. Taylor, Barkley will be our next two guys. Stupid simple here. They're both in unique situations where they're running alongside quarterbacks. They're going to have a ton of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. So they're both going to see low checkdown rates overall. They're both going to get vultured at the goal line from their respective quarterbacks. But if you're looking at Taylor versus Barkley, while they're both elite, I believe Taylor's stepping into his prime while Barkley's coming out of it. So I'm going to go Taylor over Barkley with a slight edge. If you think the Eagles are done with the tush push and they're just going to give it to Barkley, however, this year, you could go Barkley over Taylor. And then we're going to go Kyren Achane as our next two pairing. If you're looking at Kyren Williams, the concern that we've had this training camp is, one, Blake Corum is getting some positive buzz, and two, the Rams are actually seeing some pretty big injuries with their offensive line. That will be something to monitor, and it actually has me considering moving Kyren down to the bottom of this tier with Achane ahead of him. If you are looking at Achane, this is a running back that was the most efficient running back in the NFL last season. He has to come down with this efficiency. If Achane maintains his 8 yards per carry through his NFL career, he will go down in history as the best running back of all time. I got some news for you. That's not happening, right? The efficiency is going to come down. What you want to see is you want to see that the volume and the workload actually goes up. He only averaged 9.5 carries per game last year, 2.5 receptions per game, but he weighs 188 pounds. At this size, we've never seen a running back be able to handle a large workload and stay healthy. You have Jalen Wright, you have Raheem Mostert, so he's in a committee, but he was just so damn good last year, and the Dolphins project to be a top 5 offense according to sportsbooks this season. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Isaiah Pacheco, all the news coming out of training camp is he's the third down back here in Kansas City. It actually sounds like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not even the second string guy here. Pacheco's the workhorse in one of the best offenses in the NFL. Now, of course, this is going to be an offense that when you have Mahomes, historically over the past few years, it's not like these running backs have been phenomenal assets in fantasy. The last really top-end asset the Chiefs had at running back was Kareem Hunt. But this is a Chiefs team that showed last year that they're willing to slow it down and run the ball a little bit more than just spread it out, air it out with Mahomes. So the game plan looks a little more favorable. You have no Jarrett McKinnon. Pacheco is trending upwards, and Andy Reid has been confirming that he is the third down guy. Our next guy will be Travis Etienne. Etienne was a mid running back one last year, and nothing's really changed. Now, this coaching staff's come out. They've said maybe Tank Bigsby has a short yardage role. I don't care too much about that. I will definitely say I think Tank Bigsby is the running back 2 here in Jacksonville. But Etienne is Travis Etienne. Kind of know who he is. I think if you are looking at upside for him to improve from this point, it would be tied to the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. If you think Lawrence was hindered down the second half of the stretch last season due to an ankle injury, and maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars offense is going to be a lot better, if that's what you think, I think you can have Travis Etienne ranked higher than this, but we haven't seen the top end ceiling from Etienne yet. Josh Jacobs is actually one of my most drafted running backs this year. Go figure, obviously. I don't have to tell you what happened 2 years ago, but nonetheless, if you are looking at Josh Jacobs, good news is Marshawn Lloyd dealing with the hamstring injury. Marshawn Lloyd's been banged up pretty much all training camp. It looks like Jacobs is a lock for the third down role. We already know that he is a first and second down grinder that's going to have a ton of carries between the tackles, but if he's getting the third down role as well, he's still pretty damn young, and this will be the best offense that he's ever played in. I am in on Josh Jacobs. Now, of course, price points are a little bit different. I've been doing a ton of drafts on Underdog. There, I'm getting Josh Jacobs in round 5. And your regular draft on ESPN or wherever it is, you will have to take Josh Jacobs probably at the end of round 3. But yeah, you'll notice that my hot take here is I have Jacobs ranked straight up over Derrick Henry. Now, if you're playing in a non-PPR format, yes, obviously you're moving Derrick Henry up much higher than this. And I hate to keep on going back to this, but this is one of my hot takes that we have at running back this year. Because, I mean, if you just go through and if you look at Jacobs last season in comparison to Derrick Henry, very similar outputs between the two running backs. Now, of course, both running backs see significant improvements with their situation this next year. Derrick Henry is going from a horrible Titans offense to a great Ravens offense. Josh Jacobs is going from a horrible Raiders offense to a great Packers offense. If you look at the contracts, Josh Jacobs gets paid a whole lot more money. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Jacobs is going to be 26 this season. Derrick Henry turns 31 in January. So I know most people are going Henry over Jacobs. I'm just going to plant my flag. I know we've done this a million times, but Derrick Henry has declined for 3 straight seasons now. He's going to turn 31 in January. I don't expect that to be a running back that all of a sudden improves dramatically. And if we look at every running back that had a similar age 29 season to Derrick Henry since the year 2000, they all got worse from age 29 to age 30. So the declining running back at this age with this profile, I'm obviously ranking him higher than where he finished last year because I do think the situation is better. Just in a PPR format where he's not going to catch the ball, probably not a big fan. Right now, Derrick Henry actually goes back-to-back with Kyren Williams. That's in round 3 of Underdog drafts. That's in round 2 of your regular redraft leagues. I would just way rather have Kyren Williams, the running back that demonstrated the 3-down ability last year, stepping into his prime with the receiving skill set. But, of course, that's just me personally. Now, going down to our next tier, guys, this is about the range where I would say it's the historical dead zone running back, right? I mean, these are the guys that maybe have a cap ceiling overall that people have screamed, oh, you need to be avoiding this profile, avoiding this profile, avoiding this profile. And I may stand by that. If you're at an ESPN draft and you end up having to take James Cook, Rachaad White, Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, if you have to take one of these guys in round 3, I'm probably going to wash my hands. We'll talk about why in just one second. However, if you're in an underdog draft, I've actually found myself drafting a considerable amount of these players, but that's because you get them in round 6. Like you can get Rachaad White in round 6, Kenneth Walker in round 7 sometimes, and Joe Mixon in round 6 pretty much consistently. Yeah, which I will be doing that probably every night in the live stream. You'll see me taking these guys at that price. And of course, if you want to draft with me in the live stream tonight, we are drafting on Underdog Fantasy every single night till the season starts. They're best ball drafts and no time commitment at all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. It's how I won $150,000 2 years ago on Underdog. And of course, if you wanted to join a draft with us, links in the description, comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $250, plus a special Christian McCaffrey pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for week 1. And on top of that, you'll get my 2024 draft guide, my 2024 rankings, and a 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet updated every single Sunday for you until the season starts. Just have to deposit $10 with that link in the description or comment section. But nonetheless, looking at this tier, James Cook actually had some bad news with the first preseason game. Ray Davis looks like he is getting used in this offense. The concern is Ray Davis comes in and maybe has a red zone role here, and that takes away slightly from Cook. Rashad White looks like a 3-down workhorse. However, the issue is going to be he was just very inefficient with this workload last year. Kenneth Walker actually had some great news coming out of camp. I was previously very concerned about Zach Charbonnet because I do think Charbonnet is the better receiving back between the two. And with the coaching staff change, it's really difficult to know how they were going to utilize these two running backs. And we know that this coaching staff, supposedly, they want to throw the ball. At least that's what I'm hearing everybody say. And Charbonnet, if I thought he was the better receiving back, maybe he was going to eat into the Kenneth Walker workload. The good news is out of camp, it sounds like they're kind of sold on Kenneth Walker's passing down ability, which I do think moves him ahead of Joe Mixon for me, where Walker is stepping into his prime. Mixon obviously on the decline. I still stand by. I think this Texans offense is elite. I don't think that's too much of a hot take here. And I think Joe Mixon will be in a better spot this year than he was a year ago. But I just don't necessarily know if we have the ceiling for Joe Mixon, a running back that has declined for 3 straight seasons and is going into his age 28 year. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go some of these old guys, right? We're going to go Alvin Kamara next. Kamara was actually a top 5 running back in a points per game perspective last year in PPR formats. And the reason for this is very simple. You have the check down princess giving Alvin Kamara almost 6 receptions per game. Alvin Kamara had 5.8 receptions per game last year. Ridiculous. Kondre Miller sounds like he may not even make the team. Jamal Williams is straight up washed. So Kamara's in a situation for a full PPR perspective that I think he comes out here and he absolutely crushes. Now, the issue is you take away those points per reception for Kamara, you're playing in a non-PPR format. The guy's almost, I don't want to say undraftable, but he's almost not startable because the efficiency isn't there with how bad this offense is, with how old Kamara is, and the fact that it's not like Kamara has a ton of touchdown upside in a bad offense where Taysom Hill gets some red zone usage. So it's a very interesting situation here. Montgomery will be our next guy. David Montgomery has no receiving upside this year. He is being threatened by Jahmyr Gibbs for the red zone role. But with that being said, obviously Montgomery scored a lot of touchdowns last year, and the Detroit Lions do project out to be the second highest scoring offense in the NFL this season. They should have the best or one of the best offensive lines overall. But I've talked about this all offseason. If you're drafting David Montgomery, you are making a bet that he still has the red zone role. Because we've seen in the past, the compliment where Mark Ingram is there with Alvin Kamara, or Jamal Williams is there with Aaron Jones. And those running backs have roles, but it's not like it's anything to get excited about. They're going out there and they're giving you 10 carries for 45 rushing yards, 1 reception for 6 receiving yards. They're touches, but they're super low value touches just from the area of the football field that they're on. I'm a little worried that's going to happen to Montgomery this season, but he does have touchdown upside if they give him that red zone role again. And at the same time, if Gibbs were to go down, Montgomery could be a top 5 RB. Aaron Jones will be our next player. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. Obviously, it's preseason. McCarthy looked pretty damn good. Okay. If this is an offense that is actually better than what people are expecting, I do think you have some positive touchdown regression incoming for Aaron Jones, who's just really unlucky in that category last season. It's a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield that has very little competition, but he does look like he's another one of these guys drafted in 2017 that's just on the straight decline. He's going into his age 30 season. His team just gave up on him. It really comes down to, do you think that this is going to be a running back that catches the ball? And do you think that the Vikings are a better offense than people expect? Now, our next player will be Ramondre Stevenson. So apparently Brandon Ayuk got a monstrous deal from New England. He looked at the situation and went, yeah, that team has the least amount of talent in the NFL. That team has questionable quarterback. I don't want to go to New England. I think you should kind of treat it the same way in your fantasy drafts this year. Right now, sportsbooks are projecting the New England Patriots to be the lowest scoring offense in the NFL this season. With that being said, they pay Ramondre Stevenson. Looks like Stevenson's going to have a role. We know that he can catch the ball to the backfield. You go back and you see him have 4.1 receptions per game 2 years ago. The concern possibly is, does Antonio Gibson take some of that receiving volume? Because if Gibson takes some of that receiving volume, then all of a sudden, you're kind of just banking on touchdowns for Ramondre Stevenson and an offense that shouldn't have too many. Now, James Conner will be our next guy. James Conner, big time riser, right? Every single report coming out of Arizona They just say, oh yeah, James Conner's our guy. James Conner. I don't know if I've heard the name Trey Benson a single time. With that being said, for my week 1 rankings, James Conner will be a lot higher than this. 100%, I want you to prepare for that right now. However, I always get a little worried taking these guys where you have the rookie and Trey Benson waiting in the wings. Not that Benson's going to come out and be the starting running back by the time we get to the end of the year, but if we get to weeks like, say, 12, 13, 14, and then the fantasy football playoffs, and Benson's coming along, and Benson's taking 40%, even 50% of this backfield, and James Conner could still be the starter, it makes James Conner maybe not startable in fantasy. So I think Conner's going to be great at the beginning of the season, but I would expect Benson to actually increase in terms of his touches per game near the end of the year. So I think Conner's a good pick if you have a very active league where you can take James Conner, start him, get some big weeks, maybe through the first month of the season, then use him as a sell high candidate. I think he's a bad pick if you are drafting like in a best ball draft on Underdog, like Best Ball Mania, where you're trying to have the highest possible ceiling for weeks 15, 16, 17 to win like 1.5 million. There, it probably doesn't make sense because I do think that Benson's going to cap his ceiling in the second half of the year. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Najee Harris will be coming into 22. I don't want to do this. Najee has gotten worse for 3 straight seasons now. I know that some people are kind of excited for Najee Harris because Arthur Smith is coming over. I don't get that thought process at all. I don't know how on one hand we can say, oh yeah, Bijan got screwed by Arthur Smith, and on the other hand go, oh, Najee Harris is going to improve because of Arthur Smith. I know offensive coordinator was a debacle for the Steelers last year, but come on. With Najee, his 2021 campaign, if you look at his receiving upside, really does look like an outlier. Like, this is hilarious. Let me pull it up because this is a running back that had 4.4 receptions per game back in 2021. And that just kind of raises his floor, right? If you have that kind of receiving output from a week-to-week perspective, you're not exactly Alvin Kamara, but still, you're one of the most heavily targeted running backs in the NFL. Now, if we go through and if we look at that 2021 season in depth, because just let you know, in 2022, that fell to 2.4 receptions per game. In this past season, he was only at 1.7 receptions per game. You'll see in 2021, that's just what I thought. The game against Cincinnati, Najee Harris had 19 targets and 14 receptions. Like, just a massive outlier that we will never see again. The receiving role is really not there. Jaylen Warren's been more efficient every single touch he's ever had. I don't expect this to be a good offense. Right now, sportsbooks are saying they're only going to average 21 points per game. So I honestly may move Najee Harris down even further. The only thing is he has a guaranteed workload. Jahmyr White, also someone that looks to have a pretty safe workload. If you're looking at Jahmyr White, the issue is no receiving upside and a very bad offense. So you're kind of going through and trying to bank on touchdowns in an offense that currently projects out to be the 6th worst in the NFL. And also, we've never seen Jahmyr White be good in the NFL, right? We have one game of him starting, and he was a day 3 NFL draft pick. So to just kind of assume that he's going to be really good, it's a massive assumption, and I want to put an asterisk on it. Jaylen Warren will be our next guy. Jaylen Warren has been a better running back than Najee Harris every single touch over the past 2 seasons. Now, with that being said, Najee's the guy that has first-round draft capital. I don't know how important that's going to be to Arthur Smith, who wasn't there when Najee was drafted, wasn't there when Jaylen Warren was drafted. I definitely think you have to put him in the same tier. Now, if Warren were to go down, I think Najee has upside in fantasy. If Najee were to go down, I think Warren has a lot of upside in fantasy. It's just their presence maybe caps each other's ceiling just a bit. DeAndre Swift will be our next guy. The Bears look good in the preseason, right? I'm very interested. I know Roschon, dealing with an injury, did not get any snaps week 1. I'm interested to know the running back rotation here in Chicago. If you expect this to be a 2-man backfield, whether that's DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, regardless, if you think it is only a 2-man backfield, I think you can move DeAndre Swift higher than this. We've seen him in the past be able to catch the ball. Kind of got screwed in Philadelphia last season. My hesitation with Swift is I'm afraid this is going to be a 3-man running back by committee where both Khalil as well as Roschon are involved. And also, we saw Caleb Williams take rushing touchdowns in college. I don't know if that's going to happen again in the NFL, but if it does, it would be devastating for Swift. Our next guy will be Raheem Mostert at 26. Move Mostert up if you're playing in a non-PPR league. Like with Raheem Mostert, this is a running back that obviously last season came out and absolutely freaking crushed 17 points per game. I wish I knew it was going to happen. Trust me, I wish I had him on my teams. I didn't. But looking at this profile going into this next season, he's running alongside the running back that was the most efficient guy in the league last year. They add in Jalen Wright, he made some plays in the preseason. And Raheem Mostert's going to be 32 years old. We get worried about running backs when they turn 26. He's 32. And he averaged 1.7 receptions per game last year. Now, of course, the man scored a ridiculous amount of touchdowns, and that's what you're banking on. You're banking on touchdown volume here. So if you're playing in a non-PPR format, move him up. But if you're playing in a PPR league, I think this is about where he belongs. Jonathan Brooks in at 27. Jonathan Brooks probably won't play the beginning of the season. Now, there are a couple interesting ways to play this. Going over and looking at the underdog drafts where we are trying to optimize for the final 3 weeks. Like I said, highest ceiling possible weeks 15, 16, 17. And Best Ball Mania, I'm trying to turn my $25 into $1.5 million. There, I actually really like targeting Jonathan Brooks because I think that this is a player that may not give you much at the beginning of the year, but in those final 3 weeks have a high ceiling. Now, in the case of your regular redraft league, however, that's not as important, right? We just kind of want points throughout the week. So if you are looking at Brooks, I would say that this is going to be someone that makes sense to take specifically in a league where you can draft him, throw him on your IR, and you don't have to bring him off your IR until he's actually playing. Make sure you read your league rules because the most devastating thing could be is you draft the guy, have to put him on your bench, you're not able to move him to your IR, and then all of a sudden you're limited in the amount of waiver wire moves you can make at the beginning of the year. Now, dropping down to our next tier. I previously had a larger gap between Zach Moss and Chase Brown. Now they are back-to-back. We're going to talk about the Dallas guys later, but kind of a similar sentiment here. I personally don't believe Zach Moss or Chase Brown are great talents at the running back position. However, that does not mean you should not draft them because both Chase Brown and Zach Moss are in an offense that projects to be a top 5 offense in the NFL. It is an uncertain backfield. We don't know the pecking order. Chase Brown has had a ton of positive news coming out, and that's why we're going to be moving him much closer to Zach Moss because it's way less clear at the moment who is the actual guy. I wish we would have seen both play in the preseason. Now, going over to our next player, we are going to be looking at Tony Pollard. Now, in Tennessee, what we heard was this coaching staff come out and say, oh, yeah, no, Tony Pollard's the starter. Oh, yeah, Tajay Spears is also the starter. They're co-starters. I wouldn't consider either of them bench players. They're both going to be on the field a ton, blah, 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 blah. It sounds like this is the definition of a split backfield. It's a bad offense. Tony Pollard was in the highest scoring offense in the NFL last year with no competition at running back, and he wasn't able to get the job done. Now, of course, it's a very different price point on if you're drafting him this year versus taking him in round 1 last season. It's tough. I definitely think that he's a faller with the Spears news because previously I had a larger gap between Pollard and Spears. Now, Javonte, it's been a wild ride this offseason. Javonte went from a running back that was very easy to project out as the starter, saying, oh, he's another year removed from this injury. All of a sudden, he's going to come in, he's going to be efficient, and he's actually going to be able to take over. At least that was the assumption. Then this coaching staff comes out and goes, oh, yeah, we're really excited about our running back room. I mean, we have Audric Estime, we have Jaleel, we have Javonte and P. Ryan fighting for a roster spot. And you're like, what? Did you say Javonte Williams fighting for a roster spot? Very concerning at the beginning of camp, but since then, Javonte has had a ton of positive press. Javonte has been a riser where he looks a little bit safer. Funny enough, similar situation over in Washington where Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler are listed as co-starters. The thing is, when you're running alongside Jaden Daniels, with Jaden Daniels' overall rushing upside, we are going to assume that there is going to be a lower checkdown rate overall in Washington than you would expect elsewhere. You look at these two running backs, Brian Robinson is going to win in fantasy based off of rushing efficiency. Austin Eckler is going to win in fantasy based off receiving usage. So if we expect that the quarterback's not going to dump the ball off much, I am going to prefer Brian Robinson over Eckler. And then Trey Benson will be our last running back here at 33. If you are drafting Benson, just understand you're not going to be able to start him anytime soon. It's an upside shot for near the end of the year. I mean, he's clearly the running back 2 in this class behind Jonathan Brooks. The positive that he has in comparison to Brooks is hypothetically, if both these guys were healthy and starting this year, Trey Benson is in the better offense, right? The issue is we just don't know if we're ever going to get to see him have that workload unless you get a James Conner injury, or maybe Trey Benson performs very well with the limited opportunity and they decide to expand it near the end of the year. Now, our next tier is going to be led off with Devin Singletary. Singletary looks like the starter. I know Eric Gray looked good, blah, blah, blah. Eric Gray's nobody. Hopefully it doesn't turn into Kyron now that I said that, but we'll see. Singletary wasn't able to get the job done in Houston with CJ Stroud. Now he's going over to an offense that limited Saquon Barkley. And I've said this before, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not smart. But I do know one thing. I know Devin Singletary is not as good as Saquon Barkley. So Barkley wasn't able to get the job done here. Sportsbooks are projecting this out to be a bottom 5 offense in the NFL yet again this season. I will be very hesitant. Gus Edwards will be our next guy at 35. So the risers you have right now are Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Sadly, it was not possible to see them in the preseason week 1. Hopefully we get them week 2, but we'll see. If you're playing in a full PPR format, I'm a little bit less excited about Edwards there, because obviously he's never caught the ball through his career. Then Austin Eckler will be our next guy at 36. I've actually drafted a lot of Austin Eckler on Underdog because you get him as a running back 4. There, Austin Eckler goes like running back 40. Sure, I'll take him. But realistically, he's a running back that's declined for 3 straight seasons, going to a much worse situation. And what's almost most concerning with Eckler is he gets paid almost nothing. Like, for him to go over to the offense that he did, you would think, okay, you're leaving Los Angeles, you're going to Washington, you're maybe chasing the bag, right? You're just going to be getting a ton of... No. There was no bag chase. There was no bag acquired. Austin Eckler signed one of the worst running back contracts this offseason. It was about the same as Devin Singletary's. Looked washed by all accounts last year, and he's not a fit with the quarterback. So I've drafted him a lot on the Underdog with all that being said, because it's priced in. But if I look at my ADP consensus cheat sheet, he may go too high in your ESPN or redraft league to consider him. Tajay Spears will be your next guy at 37. I think Spears could presumably move up even higher than this. Like I said, this coaching staff is currently saying that Pollard and Spears, they are splitting this backfield true 50-50. I'm going to have Pollard as the running back 1, just because if you look at the actions that were actually taken by this coaching staff, this staff did not go out there and draft Spears. They went and signed Pollard, though. Spears seems to be a running back that has receiving upside, but I don't know if he has the frame. I don't know if he has the potential for a 3-down workload outside of a Pollard injury. Our next 2 guys are Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford. Going back similar to what we were talking about with Jonathan Brooks, I think that you could feel comfortable if you wanted to draft Nick Chubb in a league where you can throw him on your IR. If you can take Chubb, put him on your IR, go for it. He has a lot of upside at the end of the year. However, if you would have to draft Chubb and then use a roster spot to hold him, that's probably not a spot that you want to be looking at, just given the fact that it will severely limit you at the beginning of the season. Ford may crush at the beginning of the year. Deonta Foreman, significant injury. He had to get carried out on a stretcher, went to the hospital. Sounds like he's good. And back at practice, there was no real damage. I would love to know if Deonta Foreman was going to be a factor this year and if he was going to be playing. Because if he's not, and it's really just Ford and Chubb, I think you can move both guys significantly higher in this ranking, especially Ford, because Ford would immediately project that as the top 24 running back week 1 if we knew that there was no Foreman. And obviously it looks to be no Chubb week 1. Now our next 2 guys will be Zeke and Dowdle. Dowdle has had a ton of positive news coming out of camp. I wouldn't be surprised if Dowdle continues to move up in these rankings. The thing that you're going to have to consider here is if Dallas is going to bring in another running back. Because very similar to what we were talking about in Cincinnati, to be honest with you, I don't really think that either Zeke or Dowdle are that good of RBs. But with that being said, it doesn't matter. They are in an offense that projects out to be close to a top 5 offense in the NFL. And it looks like these are the 2 guys for the time being. A while ago, it looked like it was Ezekiel Elliott RB1. The coaching staff claims as of late make it seem like it's a little bit more Dowdle's job. Now, our last tier, we are going to go Chuba Hubbard for his early season upside with no Jonathan Brooks. But Hubbard's not that good, not a great receiver, not a great offense. So we should use the word upside lightly. Charbonnet 43. I've said this before and I kind of stand by it. I think if Charbonnet was in this year's draft class, Zach Charbonnet would have been the running back one. Now, of course, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Right now, he's in Seattle parked behind Kenneth Walker. And like I discussed, where I thought that there was potential for Charbonnet to maybe expand his role with the change with this overall coaching staff, it doesn't appear to be the case based off the remarks that they made specifically with Kenneth Walker's receiving upside. So Charbonnet may just be a handcuff. Blake Corum may just be a handcuff. And Ty Chandler is probably just a handcuff. But I'm pretty confident that if those guys were to go down in front of them, that they step in and they have large workloads, which is why they'll be in this tier. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much for hanging out with me. And as always, I'm going to be drafting tonight on Underdog Fantasy, as I am every single night on the live stream. We're actually having flock tournaments every Monday and Thursday on Underdog Fantasy till the season starts, if you want to hop in a flock tournament with me. But yeah, you can find that link in the description, comment section. If you use code FLOCK on Underdog, you'll get my 2024 rankings. You'll get my 2024 draft guide, my 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet, all three of which will be updated every single week until the start of the season. And also code FLOCK, get you hooked up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $250 and a Christian McCaffrey special pick of more than less than half a total yard. One last thing, we are doing the Flock meetup, Austin, Texas, August 22nd. Would love to hang out with you. You can find all the information at flockfantasy.store. Flockfantasy.store. If you want to come to the meetup, I'll be there, of course, and a bunch of other fantasy football YouTubers. But I think that's all I got for you. Really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope I get this draft with you in the live stream later tonight.